Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have Paul Madaule here to speak about listening training. Paul is the founder and director of the Listening Center in Toronto. He is also the author of When Listening Comes Alive and the co-author of About the Tomatis Method. He's also been featured in Norman Doidge's book, The Brain's Way of Healing, because listening training is actually a very powerful form of neuroplasticity, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Maybe we could begin by exploring how your journey with listening therapy began.
Yes, well, I always like to start talking about my work with where I am coming from, because I have experienced firsthand the work I do, the listening training work. And that is really was a starting point of my professional life, but I will even say of my life, because I think before that I kind of existed, but I didn't really felt that I was on top of my game, if you want. And I can say that because I come across this work when I was 18 years old. It's not when I was 3 or 4 or 5, or, when you don't really remember too much what happened before. 18 years old, you have already have had enough time to experience life and to experience the pitfalls which can come with life. And you can also experience how a difficulty can evolve, can infect and become other kind of difficulties. The difficulty I had right from the start was a difficulty with learning, and particularly written language, reading and writing. I was diagnosed dyslexic, which is, I have to, go back to the circumstances. I'm French. We were in the 60s, and dyslexia already existed. I was going to school, but the problem becomes so bad that I start dropping out from school, despite of doing everything that was available at the time to help people, the equivalent of speech therapy. I even went to see a psychiatrist and things like that. But what I experienced was that what starts as a learning difficulty becomes becomes a difficulty with relating to other. You start having little labels of being the worst in the classroom, of having to repeat grade, which is what we were doing at the time, which means that every year you lose your friends, or they are somewhere else. And something also that I have experienced, which was very, very important, is that having the teachers and then teacher to report relaying to parents that you have difficulty is not very helpful, because you have difficulty. I knew my difficulty. Having people to work, acting as amplifier of what I already knew was not helpful. In fact, it was extremely annoying, frustrating, inhibiting, and particularly when you arrive at this age, the teenage, I will even say the pre-teenage, 12, 13, 14 years old, when you have to start learn to live with yourself and kind of look at what is your experience and make it what is your experience, what's your difficulty, and make it as this is me, developing your personality. You start turning things around and start saying things like, well, it's not that I'm bad at school. School is not for me. And you mean that you start taking an attitude towards the world around you, towards your environment, because you have to live with yourself. You have to develop a belief system you can be relatively comfortable with. All this was my life until I reached 18, when I met someone who told me that all this little misery, petite misère in French, which was a way he formulated all what I thought was a mountain of challenges, of difficulty, this petite misère could be improved if I was ready to work with him, and if I was letting him work with me. That person was Dr. Tomatis, the developer of the Tomatis method, who became my therapist and then later my mentor. Of course, all this took a few years. He asked me to convince, which was an interesting paradoxical situation, convince my parents to send me to Paris and then later to stay in a school outside of Paris where I could commute easily on weekends to his center, that I could continue with my listening program. And from the dropout I become not a successful, but an average student, but successful enough to get the baccalaureate, which in France is basically the passport to go to higher education, university. And when that happened, I was so thrilled of what happened to me that I asked him, what should I do if I wanted to do what you're doing? And he said, we know two routes. The longer one, which was mine, which is medical school. Then there is a shorter route, at the time it was shorter, is to go into psychology. And well, I started psychology, and a few years later, I became a psychologist. And during all this time I was studying psychology, I also started working in the Tomatis place in Paris, which means that very early, while I was a very late bloomer when it comes to be a student and a successful student because of my learning difficulty, I was very early on specialized in something which was the Tomatis work, and I was sent in different parts of France and Europe and then South Africa for 2 years, and that was before I even was 30 years old, at 28, I came to Toronto, Montreal first, and then Toronto to develop this work, and liked Canada enough to accept to be adopted by it. And I stayed, and I never went back. I love it here, and it has been more than 42 years now that I've been doing this work in Toronto, and here I am. But I want to tell this story. It's a little bit long, but I think it means that something that has made me perhaps a little bit different from other therapists, other clinicians, is that I understand the child who come to see me from within, and I can convey that to the parent. And I think this is very important. Not only can I convey it to the parent, but I can very quickly, I think, get into the heart, into the mind, into the feeling of the child that is in front of me. And I can very easily understand the behaviors, why are they attention seeker, why do they cry all the time, why they avoidant so much, why they are aggressive, why they are withdrawn, why they're anxious, and all those things. All those words for me have a context, and I can help particularly the parents or the teachers when it comes to that, or the therapists who worked with them, to understand them from within. That has been the way I always saw this work. Now, of course, the work that I do is a listening work, is a listening training. I find it extremely helpful. It doesn't do everything. It doesn't resolve everything. It is in many situations a support for other therapies. Sometimes other therapy needs to be done before we do the listening work. Sometimes the listening work needs to be done before moving to another step. And of course, we have done that at the Listening Center long enough to put this work in perspective and to tell people, if they tell us, what do you think? What is most important to do? Well, we very easily say, well, do this, that. For example, when I see a child who have running nose and circle under the eyes and so on, say, work on allergy, work on diet before you start working on listening. But when I see a child who has difficulty with school, who is running out of steam, with attitude is not positive, I say, well, let's work on the ground. Let's prepare the ground for learning. Listening is one of the main ingredients to give a good start, a good base for the learning process. Attention span, concentration, even fine motor function and coordination, not of course talking about auditory processing. All those ingredients are very much connected to, on the one side, what we call listening, and on the other side, being a good achiever, or at least to be able to achieve at your own potential.
So there are so many things I love about what you said right now. And I'm going to start from the beginning, because your experience alone, although challenging in the early stages, is such a gift because of your ability to truly connect with the child, and also to understand that by focusing so much on the limitations, that it can be so demoralizing, right? And it's so negative for that child's self-worth. And so that's so important. And I love that you know this, because in your own approach, in how you're working with the children, that is considered. So that environment is positive and enriching and empowering. So I think that's really amazing.
It is what the child needs to grow. He needs positive, he needs support, he needs love, no matter what. And of course, he needs it for the people who are the closest to him, which means those who are the most influential. And this starts with the parent. And the parents know that, they know that intuitively. Sometimes they don't know how to deal with it. They, for example, say, but don't you think I'm going to be too permissive, for example, if we let them do, having a temper tantrum every time? Well, yes, we have to be careful. It's not what you do, it's the way you do it. And a child knows that. A child has been connected to the parents, to the mother, mostly, of course, well before they develop language, which means you don't need to say too many words. I see sometimes parents who lecture the child, particularly a child who has a listening problem, a language problem, has a difficulty with processing, an attention span problem. Don't speak too long, don't say too many words, don't formulate too much. Just look at them. Look, smile at them, show them, play even with little gestures, a non-verbal, say so much to a child, connect him so much, which means that be aware of it.
Yeah, that presence, that energy, just how we present ourselves with the children, they can feel it, right? Yeah. So that's so much beyond the words.
Be aware of what you say with your body, yes.
So
a smile goes so far.
Of course, of course. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how listening training works.
Listening training is really work which is done through the auditory system, which means that it's based on sound stimulation, which basically are music, And who is best music than the music of Mozart? For many, many reasons. Mozart has something in his music which is young, which is playful, which has an element of spontaneity, for the good reason why Mozart started composing when he was a child, and this childishness grew with him, stayed with him. He never took himself too seriously. Of course he was a genius, fine, but he didn't sat on his seat as I am a genius. No, he was, when we really look at his life was a life of fun and challenges, difficult, and I think he was using music as a way, it was his own therapy to overcome all the challenges, and he had many and many health, family, job, woman, all the challenges that he went through. His music was this ball of fresh air, and I think what the music of Mozart does is that it conveys this ball of fresh air. The beauty of music too, I'd say a few things about music before I go back to listening training, is that you don't have to go to music. Music goes to you. And when it comes to therapy, this is very important, because there are many therapies where we ask the child to come to the therapist while the child is not able, either physically or mentally or psychologically, emotionally, motivationally, not able to do something we ask him to do. Well, in the listening work, you just have to wear headphones. And I can tell you, give headphones and music in the headphones that children are going to love, and they are going to accept the headphones. I have still this image of this child who, because of tactile sensitivity, didn't really want something on his head, and he took the headphone and was scooping the music like if it was water coming out of it, or sweet syrup coming out of it, and putting it in his ear like this. Well, I can tell you, it didn't take very long to get the headphone on his ears, which means that music first. Music has this kind of we know that what music does on the lower level of the brain, even if the top level are not yet completely coordinated, it just gives you this syrupy feeling. And that's what the music of Mozart. We also use other kind of music, chant, which has a more centering, grounding effect that children need. It also has a more relaxing. Mozart stimulates, chant kind of calms down, which we often use, not often, very often use chant as a way to calm down at the end of a session. The session basically of a listening session lasts 1 to 2 hours, depending on the age, depending on the issue, etc. Children can tolerate 2 hours very, very easily. It's just music. But it is what the music does to the brain. How does it stimulate? And in order to understand what music does, we have to look at the ear. And when you look at the ear, the instrument, the ear, you see, in fact, I say the instrument, in fact, you see what we think are two separate instruments. The balance, body relating to gravity, relating to movement in space, relating to space, relating to the different part with connected with the proprioceptive, connecting to the different part of the body, the sense of yourself, which is so important to develop self-image. Okay, that is a base of what the ear does for us. And music stimulates that. We know that because we can see what music does when people start dancing and responding to the rhythm. Music does stimulate the body. Very important to understand that. The ear is really the main connection with our body. It is very important to understand that. And then there is another part, another function of the ear, which when you study the evolution, you see that this other connection, this other part of the ear, which is a hearing part, is add-on to the vestibular part in order to permit us to become more and more free for birds to fly, for fish to move in the water, for human which growing on legs to move, to walk. We need to have a sense of the space around us. You know very well that children or people who are blind have a very good sense of space. Why? Because they use the vestibular to understand the body and the auditory to understand the space in which they are. You don't need eyes to operate when you are not born with them. Of course, we are in a society which only believe in eyes like on the top of the, and I'm not saying that they are not important. In fact, the eyes are also extremely connected with the vestibular system, because the movement of the eyes, what we call the ocular movement, those who permit us to see around us, to discover our environment, but also to read, are also connected with the ear. That's why, as a dyslexic boy, I started learning how to read. I could start following the line without jumping up and down or turning the words around. That was stimulation, sound stimulation on the vestibular system. And then when the eyes are able to pick up the words become what they really are. The written words become what they really are, which has a translation of the sound, which means that you read relatively naturally when you have all this system, vestibular and visual, ocular visual, put in place. The information reach the brain, clear and crisp. When those systems are not working very well, and I'm still answering the question here, when the system are not working very well, the eyes are jumping up and down and so on, it's like the tripod on which the camera is not stable. It's very difficult to take a picture in that situation. And the auditory system, if the auditory system do not hear the sound the way they are, because, for example, the sound are processed too slow, or the sound are processed too uneven between the right and the left ear, or the sound are processed without the fine discrimination of the discrimination of the different sound which produce the phonemes of the words, the complex sounds which are words that we call phonemes, or the words are not going to make any kind of sense, and you start losing the meaning. You just see words, and even if they do not jump, you see words, but you cannot connect them with the sound they correspond to, which means that they do not mean anything to the brain. This, it's in a nutshell, the two type of reading problem people can experience, or the combination of the two, which was my case.
Yes.
That's for reading.
So you mentioned some great things. One, from early on in the conversation when you spoke of the children wearing the headphones and not being expected to do anything, right? It's not like they're coming in and there's an expectation. They sit there and they're present to the music, they're present to their experience, and they're allowed to do whatever. There's freedom in that session within that period of time, right? And then in addition, the power of the music. So my understanding is the use of different frequencies, because sometimes some people think listening training, they put headphones on and then they listen to music, but I know it's so much more complex than that, and we don't have to get into the details of it. But I think parents need to have a sense of, it's much more complex, that there are different frequencies used for different challenges and to address different needs. Maybe you could speak a bit more about that. You
are right. It's not just listening to music with headphones. Otherwise, you could do it at home and everything will. It doesn't work like that. The problem is using music to improve the listening function. This function that I have divided into the vestibular and the cochlear, influencing the visual, etc. This needs to be modified if we want the child to be a good listener, which means that listening is used as a way to improve that function, that focusing, that tripod I was talking about, that zoom, because I like the idea of a zoom, which is what the ear should be on top of the tripod. You need a camera with a zoom, and you need to have all this aligned and very precise. The way we do that is that we exercise not necessarily the brain. Of course, the brain gets the effect of that, but we exercise at the level of the ear, and specifically at the level of the middle ear, the two smallest muscles of our body, which are those which permit us to pick up or leave out, or pick up or leave out the information we need, and leave out the information we do not need. In other words, a good listener is someone who does not hear everything. A good listener is someone who listens to what he needs or she needs to hear at that moment, at that exact time. A poor listener is someone who listens too much, everything. You know, people with ADHD, in many cases, they are poor listeners. They don't know how to focus on what is really important in the information they receive. Which means that we have a device which was developed by this Dr. Tomatis, which basically sends the sound in a pulsative manner, sends the music in a pulsative manner, and not the normal linear manner that we normally hear it sound, in order to create tension, release, tension, release, tension. That's what pulsation does, of those muscles to make you more focused to the information you receive. I mean, that is the way we improve auditory processing and all the brain reaction which come with it, attention span, concentration. When the brain receives an information clearer, more crisp, well, it is more available for him to do something with it. That is the first part of the program. But there is a part where, and that what I call the neuroplastic part of the program, is that at one stage, the child should do more than just listening to the music, but and be involved himself or herself in the process. We call it the expressive or the active phase of our program. We ask the child to sing, depending on his level of language or verbalization or vocalization, or to imitate, animal sound, whatever is, starting with whatever is she capable of doing. Even repetitious sound, if that is what is only coming out of her mouth, we ask them. We start where they are, but what we do is to create a loop which makes them listen to themselves, meaning becoming aware of themselves, instead of doing things in a kind of repetitious, and that goes back to very much to Anna Baniel work, the passive repetition do not really stimulate the brain. In order to stimulate the brain, you have to engage it. Well, speaking and listening to yourself, something's happening, that's engaging. Particularly when it's done, and that is the role of our therapists, who are very engaging in the personality, in the way they approach the child, by play, by spontaneous, engaging the child into vocalization, verbalization, words. Then later, if that is what we want to work, reading, by reading movie scripts, by acting as if you were, a performer. I mean, we use all the panoply of play things to make it interesting and to make it not school-like, or if I would say not therapy-like in the traditional sense. You engage the brain, you start developing those connections, those neural connections, which is going to get the brain working better. And this loop is really the loop that we work, that is the loop that we know is necessary to start developing. The same as learning a language is by listening to it first, and then by speaking it and listening and speaking it and being engaged and being connected, that you are going to learn the language. This is it's not a technical explanation of our work, but it is a meaning. That is what we're trying to realize with the listening training work. Make you listen first. Now that you listen clear, that you can stay more time receiving this information, attention span longer, you are going to start listening to yourself, imitating what you receive, get engaged more easily because it comes to you faster and clearer, and here start the snowball, which are growing and growing and growing and starting to gather its own momentum. And then you don't need the therapy anymore, or you need a little touch here and there every year in some cases, not always.
I think it's important to mention too, because I remember even bringing my daughter in, and she was nonverbal, but she was using the microphone, even just hearing her own voice. So I think it's important to mention that the children coming in don't actually have to have words per se, right? It's just hearing the sound of their own voice.
Absolutely. And another aspect of the work we do that I have not talked about yet, but which is very important, and which has to do with not just the listening work, with any stimulation, movement stimulation, visual stimulation, sport, is that stimulation, neurostimulation, is electricity, is electricity for the brain. Neurostimulation, sound, I'm going to talk about sound or voice. One of the very important aspects of the work we do, and in fact is an aspect of many other work, many other therapy or intervention or even recreational activities like sport, is that any stimulation we receive is going to reach the brain in the form of electricity, in the form of electrical potential. It's going to be energy that we send to the brain, which means that take someone who feels, I don't want to do that, particularly the adolescent, I don't want to go, you get them going and ready after a few minutes, they're ready, they run faster than anybody else, and at the end of the day, they're tired, feeling that they have accomplished something. The stimulation, engaging them, is producing energy. But the problem with many children, either because they have some motor development delay, or the problem could be autism, for example, is that they either they are not able, or they are not interested for some reason in engaging, which means that they do not benefit from what children have naturally, which stimulates them, gives them energy, which energy continue to develop their brain, their development, etc. Which means that what we have to do, what the beauty of the sound stimulation is that it provides energy. It is a very good, the listening work is a very good preparation for other forms of therapy which are going to ask the child some oomph in order to accomplish it, particularly physical type of therapy. It is why I think our work is extremely complementary to ABM, for example, neuro movement therapy, because it prepares, it charges the battery that you need in order to do the work you need to do.
Yes, and that's an excellent point. I often find that combining different forms of therapies, different modalities together can be so powerful. And I do feel in many ways, listening training, it's almost like you're recharging the brain, and then the brain is just ready to take in everything that's presented to it, right? It's really this power charged period after that listening training, and then you come back and you get another boost,
Exactly, yeah, yes, and that is what we observe. And all through the variety of people, children as well as adults, that we help, we have that. I can, for example, with adults, is that I have decided to do something and I keep forgetting doing it, and I've decided to lose weight or to stop drinking or something like that. But for some reason, I do not, this beginning of the year wish that or decision that we are going to make a change in our life on the 15th of January, we already forget. It is because one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons is that there is not enough energy in the system to get carrying, to give you the drive to carry on.
No, that makes sense. And that inner motivation, right?
Yes.
There's
energy, let's say the psychological translation of energy, or the way it translates psychologically, is motivation, will, interest, curiosity, etc., etc.
Right. And in many ways, I find listening training is so wonderful for many differently abled children because music seems to be so important to them. I see so many children as a neuromovement practitioner, and they all love music. So it's almost like a no-brainer, they're going to love it.
Yes,
that's so important for the kids to love the therapy that they're going to, that when they go there, they're happy to be there. I mean, and that's part of that motivation is you want to be there, you want to participate, you enjoy the experience, you feel that motivation because of how you're received within the environment of the listening center.
We have so many times parents who come to us anxious because they don't think the child is going to accept headphones. I'm talking about children in the spectrum, or children with very severe sensory defensiveness issue, tactile defensiveness. We tell them, don't worry about it. Don't worry. Let us deal with it. Or now that because we work at home, mostly through home program, we tell them, don't worry. You perhaps show them, wear the headphones and just show that you enjoy that music, and then ask them to wear the headphone themselves. Take the little hand, give the headphone in the hand, and with your hand on the hand, put it on the head. Give them the power to decide if you want. This is very, very important. Don't impose anything. Let them part of the process. This is a very important little trick which permits us to get most of the children we help wearing headphones.
Of course.
It's not a problem.
No, of course. And I mean, you speak of, this is boundaries, right? So it's respecting that child's boundaries, empowering them, getting them to understand that they have choice. All these things are so wonderful. And I feel like those things are often missed, when children go to therapy, and yet they're so important, it's so important for them to be seen that way, that they are respected, and, that they can take the time that they need, and that we meet them where they are. And you mentioned all of these things today, and I think that's so important.
It is where, if you really want to work with a child, if you really want to improve a child's difficulty, work with a child, leave the difficulty in the waiting room. Just don't even bring it in. Just connect with the child, as you said, where she is, at the moment she is. Be there, enjoy that moment, make them enjoy it, empower them to be there with you. You are going to, I could spend 4 hours about that. This is the way you are going to work with a child. It's a child which is important. It's life which is important. Everything else is, I remember Tomatis talking about petite misère, little miseries. Of course they exist. I don't want to suggest that and sometimes they stay, but there is so much which can be gathered, developed, which puts them a little bit further away and further away and further away from them. The problem I have with a lot of approaches is that they put the difficulty as a screen between the therapist or between the world, the schools, the system, and the child. And sometimes they tell you, oh, I cannot do that, I'm learning disabled. When I hear that, that's not what we want.
Of course, I hear you. And I love what you said, we leave the difficulties, the limitations, we leave those in the weight room. You know,
Yes.
that's not what it's about. I
That's
love
right.
that so much. So just to close today, I was wondering if there was anything additional, any wisdom, anything extra that you wanted to share with the parents.
Well, if I have to say something, is a transformative power of what a child who comes with his own set of issues has on his parents, on his siblings, on, even if the school is open, on the teachers. How many teachers are going to remember a child that they have been able to help to become themselves? There is power in having someone who has a challenge. There is how many times I have seen. First of all, I've always been, I'm not a parent myself. I've been living. I don't have children, but my children are those that have been helped. But how many times I've been in awe in front of family who are dealing with some very difficult issue, and the fact that they say we have been transformed. I remember Tomatis saying, it's not the parents who make the child, it's the child who makes the parent. Well, that is what I'm talking about. This is in the difficult time you have working with the children, remember what she or he is bringing into you. It's and that in itself empowers them. They have a role. They are here for a reason, and well, that's what I think.
Absolutely.
Another thing, I mean, if you want another piece is the siblings. The siblings of children who have a difficulty are extremely important. They have to be part of it, but they also have to be respected for being individuals. They cannot become the helper. They cannot start identifying themselves through their sibling, through their brother, through their sister. They have to be put in an environment where they are those who come and help, and naturally they will. Particularly if we create situation where they meet or they stay outside of the house, then that is where the sibling becomes perhaps more helpful or more empowered in helping a sister and a brother. It's difficult to be a sibling of someone who has some difficulties, yes, but it's also transformative. In fact, I have had in my career a lot of therapists who work with us who have never been therapists, who never been the good therapists they were, because in the listening center we only keep the good ones. If they had not been a sibling of someone with a diagnosis of some kind.
No, I love that you mentioned that. Thank you so much, because this is something I tell many parents, right? That it's such a transformative journey, that there's such a blessing in the experience, although so challenging, especially in the early stages. And there's a lot of healing that is required for the parents, but it's that healing that really creates that transformation.
Yes.
And for the siblings, it just opens up this whole new world of possibilities. You know, they learn so much from that brother or sister that is differently abled. And so I think it's a beautiful opportunity, but sometimes it's a little bit difficult, you know, when the parents are going through those first phases, especially when they're in that suffering phase, you know, where
Yes.
they're still suffering. But, you know, there's light at the end of that tunnel. So thank you for mentioning that. Thank you.
They also need support, but a different kind of support.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for this amazing interview. I really appreciate it, and I think the parents will really appreciate all of your words today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Ready to do it again. Thanks to give me this opportunity. Thank you.
Of course, anytime.